House of Vampires was written and directed by Glenn Danzig and stars Devon Sawa as Deathrider, a vampire gunslinger who seeks asylum at a place called the Sanctuary, a haven for the undead. Once there, he runs afoul of Count Holliday, leader of the Sanctuary, played by Julian Sands, and Bad Bathory, played by none other than Danzig himself. The cast also features Kim Director as Carmilla Jo, Ashley Wisdom as Mina Bell, and a brief appearance by Danny Trejo as Bella Latigo. So let's talk about Glenn Danzig for a minute. For those of you not familiar with the name, he's the former and now sometimes part-time lead singer of the legendary horror punk band The Misfits. He's also the singer for his own solo band Danzig. He's the author and publisher of numerous horror porn-style comics through his own company Verotic, and his first feature film, 2019's Verotica, was an anthology film based on some of those comics. I feel like when it comes to Danzig, there's really only two kinds of people in this world. There are those who love him and those who hate him. I happen to fall into the category of those who love him. In fact, I was actually having a conversation not too long ago with a friend, and we were talking about things that, could be viewed as guilty pleasures. And I said that if I were to take any kind of guilt in anything that I enjoyed, which for the record I don't, Danzig would be one of those things. Don't get it twisted now, I'm actually an unashamed, unabashed, uninhibited fan of all things Glenn Danzig. Couldn't care fuck one what anybody happens to think about that. So to the issue of the movie itself, Deathrider in the House of Vampires is most assuredly the type of film that falls into the category of just odd. I mean, it's a vampire spaghetti western. A vampire spaghetti western. That's got to be historic. I don't think anybody has ever actually made a vampire spaghetti western in all of cinema history. Probably for good reason, and ultimately this film is just awful. The production of the film is at its best moments, it's amateurish and somehow inspired. Like take the lighting for example. The lighting in this movie, it both bothered me and impressed me. Like say anytime you had an exterior or an outside shot, the lighting was just like horrifically bad, like it was either way too dark or way too bright. Although conversely, whenever there are interior scenes, the light ends up being kind of generally competent, and in some scenes I felt really inspired and effectual in using like deep blues juxtaposed with reds and purples to sort of create a certain type of like a comic book sort of vibe to the whole presentation. And that whole on the one hand, on the other quality kind of plays out in most aspects of the film. You've got great lighting here, bad lighting there, inspired camera work there. What the hell is that about camera work there? The film literally oscillates between moments of brilliance and moments of the most absurd levels of incompetence. You've got like this lurid voyeuristic camera work with unsteady panning shots kind of moving across the room as if it's being seen from a character's perspective, cutting to these like off-centered kind of close-ups that are balanced with long shots. And all of this is clearly being taken out of the Sergio Leone playbook. But then you'll get those close-ups that they just hang on for way too long. That was actually an issue in his first film, Verotica, where he'd like zoom in on an actor and just stay there for so long that you as the viewer are starting to get annoyed and you're just like, the fuck? And in multiple shots in Veronica, the actors, you could actually tell that the actors just didn't know what was going on. Like they just had the camera on and they're just like, what is he doing? Why doesn't he just yell cut already? No bullshit. There is a scene in this movie where he zooms in tight on Julian Sands. And Sands is a pro, man, don't get me wrong. But he's just sitting there, and he's holding character. And he's holding character. And then he holds character a little bit longer. But I swear to God, I saw a moment in this man's eyes where he was actually starting to break. How did I end up in this movie? What happened to me? I was in the movie Warlock, goddammit! And then there's the fade-outs. Half of the scenes in this movie are a fade-out. Like, a scene plays, fade to black. Another scene plays, fade to black. Occasionally, you do get like a quick cut to the next scene, which is better than his last movie because in Verotica, every single scene was a fade-out. Maybe half the scenes in this movie are fade-out, so he's learning, I guess. Maybe next time he'll even throw in a dissolve or something for good measure. But there is just a sheer large amount of incompetence in the film to the point that sometimes it's laughable, like maybe in an Ed Wood movie or something like that. And then there are times where it's just awful and makes everything kind of boring. Like, for instance, there's an action sequence where a guy kills two guys while his two friends just kind of stand there and do nothing. Like, no shock or alarm, no reaction at all. They just stand there and wait for him to kill them. It's literally the most static fight scene I've ever seen. And it's like nobody knows what the hell is going on around them. They're just standing there waiting to die. And then they're acting shocked and horrified when it happens. I mean, it's not like you had 25, 30 seconds to stop the guy or anything like that. Just saying. Which is actually symptomatic of another issue in the film, which is that most of the scenes are played really slow and padded out with just extremely long close-ups and these pointless like background shots. And it's being done basically to get the full-length feature running time because there really wasn't enough story to actually get the film to a full hour and a half. I feel like a good 40 minutes of this screen time is basically just padding. Like one person says something and then another person takes 10 seconds before they begin their response. Those long close-ups that last an uncomfortably long amount of time and then fades to black. So to the story itself. I mean, I think there's a story in here somewhere underneath all the fake blood and the phony prosthetics. The movie starts off with Devon Sawa, aka Deathrider, well, riding a horse through a desert for like a really long time. Like he's riding from this direction. And then he's riding from that direction. And then there's a shot of him riding down a hill going in this direction. And he's pulling another horse behind him that has a woman, apparently held captive for what reason we don't know. But what I do know is that she's topless for some reason, and her titties are just kind of hanging out and flopping around and bouncing for all the world to see. And then they ride in this direction and her titties are bouncing around. And then that direction and her titties are flopping around. Why? It's not a complaint because her titties are awesome, but I mean, goddamn, man, you gonna drag this poor bitch through the fucking desert and not even give her a goddamn shirt? I guess he just needed the audience to see some titties. All of this plays out to the sound of the Glenn Danzig pen theme song, Deathrider Rides or something. And it's actually not a bad tune, but we eventually get to the writer's first confrontation with the bad hombre, and when it wraps up, it pretty much goes immediately into a fairly impressive looking title sequence with no music whatsoever. The theme song plays over the interminably long and generally nonsensical opening sequence, and then the titles roll, and silence. Why? Anyway, we find out that the whole point to this was to get to the vampire sanctuary, where the price of admission is one virgin woman. Hence the blonde Betty sitting up on the horse. Dude, there's like no way that chick is a virgin. Not walking around dressed like that, she not. Why is he seeking sanctuary? I'm not really sure. After getting in a meeting with Count Holliday, he's told he'll have to submit to some trial and prove that he's worthy to stay. The trial, you ask? I don't know. They never really explain it. And besides, man, he just paid a full-grown smoking hot blonde. And allegedly, she's a virgin. Like, what more do you really need? And she was clearly under duress. So what, like kidnapping's not good enough for permanent residence in this shithole? From there, the film is just largely a sort of, like, convoluted mess of bar scenes with conversations that don't ultimately go anywhere. There's actually a scene of some cowboys, they're vampires, right, and they're feeding on a couple of prostitutes from the sanctuary bar, which I actually found kind of strange initially because everybody in the place appeared to be vampires. Are they feeding on their own? And if not, where are they getting all these fresh hoes from? Must be why people gotta pay a virgin to get in. The scenes where they feed on the prostitutes are obviously meant to be somehow, like, erotic, but the camera stays on the actors so long, and the body movements are just like so, like, exaggerated. It just seems corny as hell. Although I will give it up to the actors in this film because everybody does a really good job and gives really solid, energetic performances. Like, they really play that whole spectin and pertinarin and much obliged man Western vibe just brilliantly. And for the most part, it really comes off like most of the actors are really enjoying themselves and having a good time with this. It's like they're in on the joke. But I'm giving a shout out to Ashley Wisdom on this one because, for me, she really just stood out in the film as the blonde-haired, blue-eyed vampire Mina Bell. And she, like, really owned that whole redneck girl Appalachian twang thing that she's doing in this movie. Like, she's got that whole, Mister, I do believe you is flirting with me thing down pat. I don't know, man. She's just adorable to watch in this film. But I tend to think that Miss Wisdom would probably be adorable to watch in a tax audit, to be honest. Walking around looking like a traffic ticket. That girl got fine written all over her. But whatever. Bottom line, this movie is ridiculous. But it knows it's ridiculous. It's clearly meant to be a homage to, like, well, crap, basically. And I guess on that level, it succeeds tremendously. But on the level of cinema as an art form, it's shit, basically. However, when one considers its creator Glenn Danzig and takes into consideration that his whole resume as an artist could really be summed up in the word how, it would seem likely that Mr. Danzig probably doesn't give a flippin' fuck what anybody happens to think about his art, and he's likely going to continue to create his art in whatever way his passions manifest. And I feel like there's really something to be said for an artist that will just kind of stick to their guns in the pursuit of their muse, even if that muse happens to be like, blood, boobs, bondage, demons, fire, women with big hair and leather panties, skulls, Satan, and Satan. No matter where it leads, even if it leads into kind of repetitive, self-referential camp novelty land. I'm not really sure what that something might be, but something. Ultimately, if you like Glenn Danzig, you're probably going to like this because you're already down with that whole Danzig shtick anyway. If you like movies that are incompetently made, but with a degree of earnestness and sincerity in the artist that made them, like, say, Plan 9 from Outer Space by Ed Wood, for example, you might actually enjoy this film. But if you're neither of those things, and you're generally speaking a normal, well-adjusted human being, you should probably take a pass on that one. And hey, speaking on behalf of the Danzig Nation, it's cool, man. We don't care. We're doing just fine without you. And that brings us to the conclusion of this episode of The Cinephiles. Until next time,